Good morning. My name is Graham Barn and I'm the Chief Executive of CECA Scotland, CECA standing for the Civil Engineering Contractors Association. I say that because on our webinar today we have many people who are guests of other trade associations, and the reason for that is today we're doing a webinar on the reverse charging of VAT and off payroll working by Liz Bridge. Now Liz represents at least 10 other trade associations across the UK, so this webinar today is a mixture of people from all those different trade associations. A little bit of background to Liz. Liz is the Secretary to the Joint Taxation Committee. Liz has been Secretary since 1990 and she is well known to many CECA members for doing lots of these events over the years for us. In addition, Liz is a first tier tax judge, which means that, excuse me, that Liz has heard every excuse under the sun from people who can't or won't or weren't able to pay their tax bills. So with no further ado, I'd like to now pass over to Liz, who will take you through the rest of the seminar. Liz, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Liz Bridge, and I'm going to take you through the two topics today quite smartly, because really I hope that they're revision for you and not the first time that you've ever explored these topics. If you have questions, type the questions in the, I think it's called the chat pod, and at the end we will work the questions together. So without more ado, let's start on reverse charge. I know that Glenda has made you all copy a paper flowchart. The paper flowchart is slightly different from this one. This one's been laid out so that it will fit on a screen. And the flowchart was designed in negotiation with the revenue so that nobody would ever make a mistake when they were reverse charging. And whenever you have a doubt about reverse charging, what I would always say to you is go back to the flowchart, start at the top and work through the questions carefully. The revenue have always agreed that if you use the flowchart and you use it properly, one, you shouldn't make a mistake, but two, if you do make a mistake, they'll honour it because you were trying your hardest. So let's begin to have a look at what reverse charge is doing. Really, if we take our eye off the flowchart a minute and think, what it's doing is stripping VAT away from the bottom of the construction tree and letting customs and excise collect it straight away from the firm that has received it from a customer. So it's reverse charge VAT takes the VAT out of the hands of all the construction tiers, the subcontracting tiers. Let's have a look at this flowchart. You always have to ask yourself, are you supplying labour as a gangmaster or employment business, or are you invoicing for materials only? And by that I mean, are you a builder's merchant of a sort? So are you a labour agency or a builder's merchant? Because both of those categories are not affected by reverse charge VAT, and they will always charge normal VAT. I think that in this audience, 99% of you will slip down through the no. You aren't builders merchants and you aren't labour agencies. So then you would go on to the question, are the supplies you're making to the customer within the scope of CIS? That means, is your trade one of building buildings and structures, repairing buildings and structures, installing kit into buildings and structures? My guess is that none of you are in the business of selling chocolate bars. You wouldn't be here today if your trade wasn't within the scope of CIS. The scope of CIS is in the literature that comes from the revenue and from the JTC. You can read it. You can read CIS 340, but it's the CIS scheme that you've always run. If you're registered yourselves for CIS, to be honest, the chances are your supplies are within the scope of CIS. And I'm expecting you as the audience to be all coming down that arrow. Yes. Is the supply that you're making standard rated or reduced rated? You are none of you in the business of exempt supplies. The only supply that you could be making that isn't standard rated or reduced is if you're working for house builders, in which case you would be 0 rating. If you're working for a house builder and you're 0 rating, you would slide off to the normal rules apply, but it's a 0 rated invoice. So on the basis that you are the civil engineering industry and peripheral trades, actually the chances are that the supplies you're making are standard rated. And you're coming straight down to the box, is your customer VAT registered? I want to look at those next 2 boxes together. It's, is your customer VAT registered, and is your customer CIS registered? If we think for a moment what that means, really those 2 questions are asking, is your customer large, and is your customer heavily engaged in the construction industry? Because this flowchart is sniffing out players in the construction industry. Is your customer VAT registered? Let us imagine that you're working for a householder. The immediate answer would be no, and normal VAT rules would apply. Is your customer registered for CIS? Now, they could be VAT registered, they could be a paper shop or a small chain of shops. Are they registered for CIS? That question is really saying, are you in the building industry, or do you spend more than £1 million a year on building work? Again, a small paper shop, the answer would be no, not registered for CIS, and normal rules would apply. What has always frightened me in construction is that you are all so grateful to win work that you often make very few inquiries about who your customer actually is, and will start jobs without contracts. In the future, from the 1st of March, actually from now, you are going to always have to ask a customer and keep a record of it and know where it is. Is your customer VAT registered, and is your customer CIS registered? When you are awarded a tender, you will automatically ask that. If the answer to either of those questions is no, you will just normally require VAT. Normal invoice, just as now. But if what you find is that you're doing construction work for a player who's VAT registered, and for a player who is firmly within the scheme, like you are working as a subcontractor for a main player. And at that point, you are set fair to reverse charge. But you want to know one more thing. Has your customer provided you with an end user statement? I'm going to explain what end users are, but generally speaking, an end user is somebody that's going to sell a building, lease a building out, or sit in the building and work from it. So if you are a subcontractor working for a main contractor who's working for a client, the main contractor isn't the end user. They're going to on-sell building work. You will ask for an end user statement, and either they'll say, no, we're not an end user, or they won't give you one. If you don't get it, you will reverse charge. The default position, and I want you to sort of bang yourselves on the head here and write on the bit of paper in front of you on your flowchart. If your customer is VAT registered and if your customer is CIS registered, you are flat out default reverse charge. It is only if they give you an end user statement that you charge VAT. So I don't want you charging VAT to be safe. Once your customer's VAT registered and CIS registered, you reverse charge to be safe. Okay? We started that flowchart by talking about materials. Are you invoicing for materials? Because if you invoice for materials, you will charge VAT. I want you to ask yourselves if you buy a lot of materials as a firm, because in this brave new world, as you buy materials, they will never be reverse charged to you. So you will always be paying VAT for them. If you are buying materials but working for main contractors and therefore never receiving any VAT, the VAT on the materials you buy will exceed the VAT that you will ever charge. And you'll have enormous stress on your cash flow. You need to know that now, because at the moment, most of the people listening put in VAT returns quarterly. You can always opt to put in VAT returns monthly. If from now on, from once we start this reverse charge business, you start to work in a world where customs and excise actually owe you money, it would be better to be a monthly trader and get a check back monthly than to remain a quarterly trader and get your money back quarterly. You need to test your cash flow. You need to think about how much VAT you are going to get in from the customers that you have in March and April, and approximately how much VAT you would spend on materials. And is it in customs and excise interests? Are you banking with them, or are they banking with you? You need to think about it and consider becoming a monthly trader. Now, I want to go on now to who is an end user. And it's easy to read this slide and to slip down from who is an end user to somebody who will sell or rent or use the structure. And let's have a look. They're developers. You know, if you work for a house builder or for somebody commercially developing, they've bought a plot of land, they want you to put in a factory or the roads for a factory, and they're going to sell that building or that freehold. They're an end user. If you're working for a landlord or a local authority or a utility company or a domestic householder, anybody that's going to sit in the building themselves, they're an end user. But I want you to just for a minute focus on the little words under who is an end user. Because I want you always, 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 always to look at who is the name on the contract with you. Not the overall project, but who are you contracted to? Because that's who you have to test. You could, for example, be contracted to Balfour Beatty, who are contracted to the Highways Agency. You are not contracted to the Highways Agency, who are an end user. You are contracted to Balfour Beatty, who is not an end user. You always look at who pays you. You don't, like a racehorse, look over the fence and onto the next fences. You only look at the person who's going to pay you. Are they an end user? And those are examples of the sort of end users that there are. So, for example, you get big scaffolding firms who are only contracted because they're big and they're good and they're working on British rail sites, but they will be contracted to people like Balfour's who are contracted to the railways. They are not contracted to the end user. So when you're thinking about it, always think, who is paying me? Right, so we're very, very close to the start now. And because no more tax is collected under this scheme than ever was, but the reason that you could go under is for cash flow purposes. You will last year, well, 2 years ago, for every £100 of work that you did, you got £120, and you had use of £20 for about 6 weeks on average. Once we get to March, you will get £100. You need to make sure that your cash flow is secure in March and April, and that you can bill out for work that you've done quickly. So you can work now on the customers likely to pay you in March and April, checking, are they VAT registered? Record and check. Are they CIS registered? Ask for the UTR and check it. Or ask them for a copy of the check they did for your firm, because they will be checking you as a subcontractor that they have to pay. The fact that they're checking you, they can copy the check out and show you. So you want to know, are they VAT registered? Are they CIS registered? And you want that recorded in your system. You then need to ask them, are they an end user on the project? And if they are an end user, you need more than a telephone call. You need it in a letter or an email. And if you don't have it, but they are VAT registered and CIS registered, the default is reverse charge. Okay. So you read the government websites. There's a very good webinar that I helped design, that's why I'm advertising it, on the government one. You'll have watched this one. I don't think you can have too many webinars about reverse charge before the penny drops and you understand what you're doing. Talk to your accountants about cash flow. All the trade federations have an Excel document that I've put out from the JTC, which you can put in your own numbers and check your cash flow. Check your cash flow. Plan how you're going to pay bills through March and April, because cash flow will be at its most difficult. You'll need to redesign invoices and applications for payment. You will need to be able to put an invoice out which does not ask for VAT. So it shows work done, £100, standard rated VAT, reverse charged. It does not show £20 VAT. It does not show £120 at the bottom. So you need to have blanks ready to use so that you're not designing on the 1st of March for invoices to go out on the 1st of March. I want you to be able to invoice and apply for money quickly once we move into the new scheme. Consider how you're going to monitor and record whether your customers are VAT registered and CIS registered, and where you're going to keep your end user declarations. Think about whether you need to be a monthly repayment trader. Right. Do you use subcontractors? Because you are VAT registered and CIS registered. You will not want a subcontractor invoicing you or applying for VAT after the 1st of March. They're sometimes not very well informed. It's a euphemism, isn't it? I want you, if you can, to produce some warning letters to your subcontractors, basically saying to them, if they invoice you for VAT after the 1st of March, you'll return the invoice to them and ask them for a reverse charge invoice, and that you will not pay them until you get it. So a warning letter is useful, and there are specimen letters available from the trade federations and from the JTC. Have you got upgraded software? You must have upgraded software. You are a nit if you think you can work doing reverse charge manually. You can't. You need upgraded software, you need it installed, and you need to know how to use it. And I think that's the end of reverse charge VAT. We'll see what the chatbot produces. So before your heads blow off entirely and you all feel sick, we're going to slide seamlessly on to off payroll working. Off payroll working starts in April, and it has only been legislated so far for local authorities. They've been doing it for the last 2 or 3 years, and now in April it starts for large and medium-sized employers. I'll explain to you in a second who they are, but when I say don't hold your breath, if you're a small employer, and you find when we get to the slide you are, I don't want you to start eating biscuits and thinking, ha ha, I'm off the hook. Because this legislation has been so successful with the local authorities that it's been moved to large and mediums. As soon as large and mediums are tucked comfortably into this bed, it will be moved to smalls. So look at it and think about it, and think about what it's doing in your firm, what it would apply to you. Now, can I get to my next slide? Oh, I can't get there. Oh, hang on. Yes, I can. So, are you an employer in the frame for the new legislation? Right. Have you got more than 50 employees, a turnover of 10.2 million, or balance sheet assets of 5.1 million, not £5? If you trigger one of those, I would tell yourself that you are in this legislation. Actually, technically, you need to have more. But unless you want to be monitoring this day and night for the rest of time, if you're anywhere near this trigger, I would like you to make sure that you're compliant, because you will turn your back, you will move more than this, and you will have not noticed. So don't say, oh, I've got 49 employees, I'm safe, or I've only got balance sheet assets of 4.9. Once you're near it, you must look at this legislation. What does off payroll working mean? It means that your firm is paying somebody who looks, to all intents and purposes, to the rest of us like an employee, but they're not on your payroll. What have I written? If your firm was not paying another company, partnership entity for their work, the worker would be your employee. So you're paying somebody else, but the worker is on your site doing your work and possibly is fairly indistinguishable. The most often seen is your firm pays some sort of intermediary who pays George Canning Limited, who pays George Canning, and George Canning works in his overalls on your sites, and you don't have him in pay as you earn, but he is there doing the stuff an employee would do. I think. Now, the people you're not to worry about are people who work on your projects and are engaged by other contractors and whose faces and skills you barely know. So you certainly didn't ask for that particular man, and you've contracted to a subcontractor who's put his own men in, and all you care about is whether the work is done properly. People where the subcontractor you subcontract with is genuinely responsible for the quantity and quality of the job, and he supervises and controls his own workforce. And then people already on your payroll. So I'm going to start talking to you about suspicious people, people who, if I was an inspector of taxes, I'd want to know more about. And I want you to start making lists up of the sort of characters I'm going to describe. But if they're already on your payroll, you don't need to worry about them being. And if they come through a subcontractor and that subcontractor is genuinely contracted to do the work and you don't care who did it, again, it doesn't matter. You're not to worry. So let's have a look at who you should worry about. Right, they're regular faces. Faces on your in your business. Anybody with your firm's name on a business card or who's named on your website. Anybody who wears your logos on their clothes. Anybody who sits somewhere regularly or attends regularly, even one day a week. Anybody that's somebody else coming into your building or your sites for a small other job might genuinely think was your worker because they were doing exactly the same thing as people who are your pay-as-you-earn workers. So that list really focuses possibly on white-collar workers. In 2008, we all made a lot of people take early retirement, and then they popped back as part-time consultants, doing pretty much often the same jobs they had previously done, and sitting sometimes in the same desks, but doing it part-time, working for their own limited companies. They are very dangerous. Number 14. I wonder if I missed one. Right. Anybody who works for nobody else, as far as you know, or works for very few other people. You know, if you're scrapping around saying, well, I know sometimes he does work for his brother-in-law, don't rely on that. You know, if in your gut, if the ulcer tells you he has very few other people that he works for, listen to the ulcer. Anyone who's previously worked for you in pay-as-you-earn and is doing the same-ish job, even part-time, anybody you know, just by looking at your business records, that they're working for their own limited company. You know them as Lisbridge, but they're within your CIS records, or your invoicing is eBridge Limited. Anyone that you have particularly asked to work for you as a singleton person because you really liked them or you liked their skill set, you know he's a first-class electrician. He would never let you down, and that he works for you regularly. This gets to the points of the ridiculous, but anybody that drives your vehicles and is insured to drive your vehicles, anyone you give holiday pay to or allowances, anyone you train, comes to your Christmas party, anyone who you think might describe themselves as working for you. Inspectors of taxes don't live in laundry hampers and only come out on wash day. They live in ordinary housing with neighbours, and they live in the community. And if somebody says to them, oh, I work for blah, they may well look to see if they are on blah's payroll. It becomes amusing and interesting to do it and to see how people are paid. Sorry, I can't tell. Why are they dangerous? It's because the legislation that comes into force in April ultimately puts the responsibility for pay-as-you-earn onto the business that pays the limited company that pays the end person. So in legal terms, they're called the fee payer. There is George Canning or Lisbridge, who works for George Canning Limited or Lisbridge Limited. It's the firm that pays the first limited company in that chain that is the fee payer. And the law says that the fee payer must apply pay-as-you-earn to the fee paid to the person's own limited company. So for the first time in Britain, we've got pay-as-you-earn being deducted from a payment to a limited company. If there is a long chain in place and that fee payer doesn't apply pay-as-you-earn, the liability swings back and it swings back to the firm that used the limited company, you. And there is no getting away from it. So that's what you're watching for and what the danger is. But what if the fee payer doesn't do what they should do? Liability lies with the firm who used the human being. So let us say, for example, that you have a chain in place where there are some men who once worked for you as employees or could easily be working for you as employees. That's the sort of work they do. But you get them through a business who pays their limited company, who pay them. You will need to be absolutely certain that the fee payer is deducting pay as you earn from the chain, because if they aren't, you're pricing work all wrong. Customs and excise can come back to you for employers and employees, tax and national insurance contributions, and it will take you bust. So in chains, most of the time you may be the fee payer. You're paying George Canning Limited and he's paying George Canning, and you must apply pay as you earn to the payment to George Canning Limited. Where there's a longer chain in place, you have got to ask the longer chain, are you applying pay as you earn? And you've got to be absolutely confident they are, and not be treated like babies and told platitudinous lies, because the agency, the intermediaries, are often men of straw, and they are not really at risk. Once nasty things start to happen, they will disappear and the risk will come bobbing back to you. So what I've been saying to you is you compile a dangerous list. You make a list of everybody who's working on your sites and in your offices, whose faces you regularly know, who are there. You know them, you know their names, you know who they are. And then you take off everybody that's already on the payroll. You take off anybody that you get through a really genuine subcontract, and it isn't your employee. If anything, it's somebody else's employee. And then you CEST test them. You go onto the revenues site and you type in CEST and you CEST test them. It's an anonymous site. There isn't a big brother watching through the screen to see that you are testing Mickey Mouse and therefore thinking they'll inquire about Mickey Mouse. It is totally anonymous. You answer the questions truthfully, and you see what answer you get. If you don't answer the questions truthfully, the person you're cheating is yourself. If you answer the questions truthfully and it says this person is not an employee, you go back in, you put their name in, you answer the same questions, and you print it out, because you have done a CEST test and you are absolutely in the clear for having them paid off payroll. If the CEST test says that they are an employee, you have to think what to do. You can squeeze answers if that is what you want to do, but you have to be careful. You know where you are and where the danger is, because whatever you squeeze, as time goes on, things change and people change and situations happen, and you may find that the other person says that they're an employee and will start to tell the revenue truths that you have squeezed. So you want to look at who your danger lists are and who the danger list says should go in, should have pay as you earn applied. If you want to look at the public guidance, you start there, because you'll need to work through them and to think about it. And I don't know. Right. One of the things that you'll have to do, if you find that you haven't, I haven't got a slide for this, if you have a worker who fails a CEST test, is being paid through their own limited company, and the CEST test says that they are to go into pay as you earn, and you are going to bite that bullet, you will be applying pay as you earn to the money going to a limited company. That will not give that worker any workers' rights, no rights to holidays, no rights to sick pay, no rights to furlough. It simply gives them a deduction for national insurance and pay as you earn. So their take-home pay will be greatly reduced from what they're used to look far more like an employee's take-home pay, and they will not get employee rights. If it was happening to me, I would not like it, and I would bite you back and probably want employment if that was all that was being offered. I certainly would want to renegotiate the pay package, and you may want to renegotiate the pay package. The start date for off payroll working is April. So not only are you flat out getting reverse charge into your invoicing system, but I want you CEST testing the dangerous and starting to negotiate with anybody who ought to go into pay as you earn what on earth you are going to do. Are you going to move them into pay as you earn? Do they understand they get no workers' rights, but that they will have pay as you earn applied to their wage? I can't solve that for you. I'm rather sorry for you, but that is the way it is. And I think that's my last slide. There is a second at the bottom, business support service, a telephone number. Both of these measures may cause cash flow problems for you. If you have cash flow problems as a firm, you phone that number. It's the revenue support system for cash flow problems, for paying taxes. There has never been a better time to stage your taxes. There is an awful lot of money running about in the revenue that will allow you to pay by instalments. You must always phone the revenue in advance of taxes being due, not in arrear, but you use that number to phone them. And I think that's where I finish. Poor old you. This is now where I burst into helpless laughter because you've got a really awful problem. And I've only got the questions in the chat bot. Thank you ever so much. And I'm sorry if it's been boring. I think it's probably been more exciting than boring. Thank you. Bye.